Hey everyone, it's Dave. Welcome to today's special episode. We have a guest. It is Chris, and I thought it'd be interesting to talk to him because I saw a Twitter post he made talking about the small launch market and rideshare and Electron and the future of the whole market. And that's one area where I've wanted to learn a lot more about the future of Electron, how many launches we can think about them having per year, how much rideshare is going to cannibalize that market. And it sounds like, Chris, you did like 60 plus hours of research
Right.
on that. So
Yeah.
here to see what insights we can get. And by the way, guys, Chris also does have a YouTube channel. So he's made a couple videos. I can link that as well as his Twitter down below if you are interested in checking those out. So yeah, welcome to the channel, Chris. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Okay. What made you decide to kind of dive into this all so deeply?
Sure. So last summer, I made a Rocket Lab valuation model and a video about it. And one of the biggest criticisms of it, and one of the places where I really wasn't happy with it, is just predicting space systems and launch, because there isn't really a great way except just applying like a growth curve or something to it. So I really wanted to get down deep into the launches that have occurred and extrapolate this forward.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. So do you mind if I ask, are you invested in Rocket Lab or any other space companies at all?
Sadly,
Or?
I don't have enough money to
No. Yeah.
make
Well,
it economical.
seems like still early days for you. I'm sure you've
Right.
got
In a
plenty
few
of
years,
time to
maybe.
start investing.
Right.
By the way, I did highlight a few quotes I found interesting here, just going through it, but you're welcome to jump in with anything you want to add.
Right.
Looks like small sat missions addressable by rideshare for the last 5 or so years. 80% you could kickstage them.
That's mostly the other category there. If you scroll down a little further, it gets into the kickstageable section.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Kickstages are actually a very small minority of the small satellite market.
So yeah, in the past 6 years, 55 dedicated small sat launches have occurred. 11 of these missions could have been completed by launching on a rideshare mission. So it was interesting to hear how they still chose to go with a dedicated launch despite that. Going
Most
through
of
some of
the
these.
reason, from what I've seen of these launches, is that it was you can see like the 2 Electron launches at the top, or the Launcher 1 and Rocket 3 launches. These are the first launches of essentially risky missions.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get a much cheaper price. This seems to be the primary reason there.
Okay. Dove, that would be Planet Labs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because now they don't really launch on Electron at all.
They've kind of solved the small launch problem just through sheer scale. They have, I think, they've launched 400 satellites in total. So at this point, you can just launch on rideshare missions. You don't really need a unique orbital plane like Strix you can see there in that list.
Okay. That is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, actually, because, theoretically with Planet Labs, they need to have full global coverage, right?
Right.
And my understanding, again, it seems like you're pretty technically savvy about some of these things. A lot of these ride shares go to the same like inclination, or like 98 degrees or something like that.
The sun synchronous orbit.
So if they're going to sun synchronous orbit?
Yeah.
Okay. And from there, they are able to spread them out across the globe?
Yeah, it's fairly easy to spread out just in the same orbital plane, just because you can vary the orbital period slightly. Like
I
if you
see
orbit
what
1
you're
minute
saying.
faster, you get spread out.
Okay, so they still have coverage, but yeah. So the reason for launching on a dedicated small launch rocket instead of a rideshare mission is likely schedule requirements. So mostly just, I guess, controlling your schedule for the Electron customers.
Right now, there's apparently a 2-year delay to get on a transporter mission. So
yeah, I heard that. I heard that on Adam Spice's recent call. Did you hear that somewhere else, or was?
I think it was your video, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you watched. So yeah, they can have more control over launch date and orbital parameters. This chart I found was very interesting. So thanks for making that one for sure. We have the ride-shareable, kick-stageable, unique plane, small launch vehicle, government, and military. So it was interesting to me that this unique plane under 30%. And As I read it, those are the ones that are like always going to need
Yeah,
a
that's
small
pretty
launcher.
much
Would you?
it's 90% of Rocket Lab's upcoming manifest in the next year. Those unique plane satellites.
Okay, so 90% of their 2024 manifest or
Uh,
2025.
2024 and 2025. There's a
Okay.
mix there.
That's interesting. Okay, they don't have very many government and military payloads on the manifest then over the next year.
Yeah. Well, the government small launch vehicle category here. This is Rocket Lab can't really compete with these because they're government launch vehicles. So this is like a
Oh, okay, so they're
like
not
if
payloads.
Korea
They're
builds their own launch vehicle, they want to launch Korean satellites on that launch vehicle.
Sure. What about the military payloads
That's
category?
mostly NASA and U.S. military rideshare missions. You scroll down a little bit, there might be a list of them. Yeah,
Down
right
here.
there.
Yeah.
Okay, these are the government payloads.
Okay, and these are Vega, Pegasus, India.
The government funded development. Those are.
So anyway, continuing on, 16 small sat launches of the last 55 are the not addressable ones. So that's the one we were talking about here. That was the most interesting. Are you concerned that that's only 30% of the overall pie of this chart?
I don't think the percentage matters very much. Right? This is like a lying with statistics type thing. Right? The actual market here is pretty big, and given that Rocket Lab is growing their launches 2x in 2024, I think this isn't a major point of concern.
Not a point of concern. Okay.
Yeah. Rocket Lab already, like the Rideshareable and Kickstarterable missions, this is what's really going to be taken by rideshare missions, like Transporter. And Rocket Lab already 90% of their manifest isn't these launches, so this isn't a big concern.
Just kind of curious because you follow Rocket Lab somewhat closely, right?
Right.
Do you think they'll start launching their own rideshare missions on Neutron when that gets going?
Yeah, I do. Most Transporter missions on Falcon 9 are actually between 3 and 5 tons. So this is well below the mass of Neutron, mass to orbit.
Interesting.
They might be limited by payload volume there. You can see some of the pictures of the Transporter payload fairing. And, it seems very cramped in there.
Yeah. And then that wouldn't really be cannibalizing Electron much, I guess, because anyone who can afford rideshare will do so at the prices. You had the prices broken out. Do you remember? Was that up above? Did I miss that? Or
that's below this?
Below. Okay, because I found that extremely interesting. So yeah, all the launches mentioned above have inclinations that are within several degrees of the 98 degrees. That is common for rideshare missions. And major inclination changes require immense amounts of fuel. So obviously you're not doing that.
Right.
So yeah, this is what you were saying previously. Only 10% of small sat launches can be addressable by a kick stage. So that's a very small segment, getting them to their proper orbit.
That's right. For all the hype around kick stages, there aren't actually too many missions that use them.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we have on Electron, they have their photon or whatever, but I don't know of too many of them for like a larger vehicles. I see you mentioned one impulse vehicle, but yeah,
that's the only one I've heard of. Right.
Oh, that's the only one you're aware of as well.
Yeah, really using it as like a third stage for like Falcon 9 is really where Impulse probably will generate most of their revenue.
Right. Yeah. Oh, this is the new one they just announced.
Yeah, Helios. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
That's a much bigger market than for small satellites here.
Right.
You can charge a lot more. Like a dedicated Falcon 9 mission is $60 million. Falcon Heavy is, for commercial payloads, I think $120 million. So as long as you charge less than $60 million, you can still provide a cheaper product.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting announcement. In terms of types of satellites, I found this kind of interesting too. So you got Earth imaging, Earth observation, synthetic aperture. I did ask you to break these out on Twitter. For anyone watching, do you mind just explaining the difference between the Earth observation and imaging?
Sure. Earth imaging is a subset of Earth observation here, but it's satellites that exclusively image, like Planet Labs or Black Sky. Earth observation is more like NASA's Tropics mission that just like try to observe radar or synthetic aperture radar, weather. Right, that's a different category.
Yeah, and then we do have synthetic aperture down below. The thing I found interesting about all this is they're just kind of different ways of looking at the Earth, I
Right.
suppose, where we're not really seeing much in the way of like communications or, other use cases for small satellites.
Right.
Do you think we're going to be kind of confined to this area for the foreseeable future?
I haven't seen many good applications of communications with small satellites. It's just you really have two paradigms if you're doing communication satellites. You have the big geostationary launches, which have been going on, I think, since the 80s and have stayed fairly static. And you have the new paradigm of constellations, which is growing exponentially. And for
Mhm.
constellations, for communications constellations, you don't want very small satellites.
Yeah, of course, that wouldn't make sense. The Varda one was a little interesting, but I don't
Right.
know how much,
In
room for
space
growth.
manufacturing, I really hope this becomes successful in 10 to 20 years, because once we go through the growth of this current exponential of constellation satellites and that evens out, I'm wondering like what will be the next big source of growth. I think that'll be manufacturing in space.
You do, eh? I
Yeah.
was kind of speculating on where the next big growth will come from as
I haven't
well.
seen many other good economic uses of space other than constellations. Maybe
Yeah,
commercial space stations might have a big opportunity here.
it
That
could
might
be
be it.
interesting. But I would imagine even in space manufacturing, like once you're starting to scale that, it wouldn't really make too much sense on the small launch either, what do you
Right.
think?
Yeah.
So, okay, so I guess we're really focused for the foreseeable future on these Earth viewing various ways.
There's also the dedicated military launches, which can't use rideshare missions for NSSL national security reasons. So there's a market there too.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. It's funny because you always think about like the economic reasons for doing things and what makes the most economic sense. But for them, like basically you're saying, and I guess I agree with, even if they can fit it on a ride share, they won't just because they don't for security reasons.
Right.
Yeah. Do you think there's ever, I guess there would never be like a enough of a monetary draw to go for that. I can't imagine
You
for
could
the
save around 2 times the money, but I can imagine this meeting in like a government contractor, or there's
yeah,
someone who cares a lot more about security than money in that room.
for sure. Yeah.
Sure.
um so yeah, as you were kind of saying, a lot of observation here. So we have Black Sky. Are you able to explain, because Black Sky is also a company I've looked in a little bit. They're kind of imaging or observation. I always get those two mixed
Imaging.
up. So why is it that they use Rocket Lab and not Planet Labs? It's just the scale of it.
Yeah, that's my understanding. They have a much smaller constellation. Now, for Planet Labs, they can launch on transporter missions because every transporter mission can go to a slightly different orbital plane relative to the other ones, so you still get adequate coverage of the Earth.
Okay.
But if you're launching a lot, much fewer satellites, you really want to get to an exact orbital plane.
So wouldn't it make as much sense for them with like the fewer number of satellites then?
Right.
Okay.
Really, the orbital plane requirement is how often you go over the same spot on Earth.
Right.
Right? With transporter missions, you might be able to get this down to once every 6 hours. So to get below every 6 hours, you need like a Black Sky sized constellation launched on dedicated launches.
Okay. And then looking at their current manifest for 2024, the majority of these are for Earth observation as well. So I guess kind of like we noticed or observed, Spire here, NASA, yeah, Capella,
Right.
Black Sky. Interesting trend.
Right. Rocket Lab really knows the market they're going for.
Yeah, I guess so. Because a lot of people, the big criticism is, and I guess I probably should have mentioned this out of the start, the big criticism a lot of people have is like they're asking, is small launch even really a market that's like here to stay?
Right.
Is it going to be taken by ride shares, or does it even make sense? So
Right. With satellites that require unique planes, this is really only a small launch addressable market.
yeah, so to me, like there'll always be a little bit of a market here, although
Right.
whether that's
30%.
always Electron or another vehicle comes along, that's another discussion.
Right.
So we have military operators, government, and commercial. Commercial being over half of small satellites. And yeah, this is what we looked at previously. So I can understand why a government might want to invest in owning their own rocket, I suppose.
Right.
But all these kind of would not be competitive financially on the commercial
Right.
market. Would you agree with that?
I agree. Aren't Pegasus launches around $40 million or something completely absurd?
Yeah. Do you know the mass that they take to
I think
Leo?
Pegasus is around 200 kilograms.
200 kilograms. So it's not even like larger than Electron. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So any thoughts that these governments might eventually decide to just go with the commercial model? It seems like the US is starting to go that way a lot more lately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's certainly no shortage of small launch startups. So as they start popping up in all the countries mentioned here, Japan, Israel, Korea, India,
Yeah.
then it seems
But
if you have a commercial government payload that doesn't have the national security requirement, it seems you'd much prefer launching on a 2 times cheaper launch vehicle.
for sure. But you think they would still want to go with like a homegrown company?
This is a question of politics and government, how much they want to subsidize their own development.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
guess
too
so.
much about that.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Right.
Okay. So, US military almost exclusively launches its satellites on dedicated launches. This is to maintain national security by having tight control, as we kind of talked about previously. So that should continue to occur. The cost I did find very interesting. I've kind of dove into it a little bit before, but saying how an Electron has a call it $7 million cost. We're looking at for a similar payload on a Rideshare, $638,000. That's a pretty stark difference.
That 11x is huge, right?
Yeah, massive. So
Yeah.
definitely understandable why, they're kind of two different markets, and it's not
Right.
even really a decision, I guess. It's more
Right. If you're Black Sky, you just can't launch on a transporter mission. You can't save that 11x.
Yeah. So I guess, pretty clearly, if there was no small launch market, then
Right.
yeah, exactly. Okay. So even with the kick stage, they're still looking at 5.5 million for a Rideshare plus kick stage versus 7 million. So that's savings right there.
Yeah.
Although it does get
That's
closer.
estimating off the cost of a photon. So
Right.
Impulse might be able to get a lot lower than that by taking complexity out the spacecraft.
Okay. So that's based on a photon cost.
Yeah.
This one I could see if you're able to get a lot more control of scheduling and timing. Maybe that, extra 2 mil or so is worth it.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see.
That might be like 10%.
Yeah, which could be worth it for some companies.
Right.
So in conclusion here, you said around 20% of the existing dedicated small satellite launch market will go away with the increased cadence of rideshare missions, which sounds pretty scary when you hear it up front.
Right.
However, that 30% that require the unique orbital planes will remain part of the market forever.
And that's already what Rocket Lab is really going for.
Yeah, and it
There's
seems like
much
it's
concern
already
from
really happening, right?
Right. That
So
20% is really what that really means is rockets that are just going on their first few launches, they will have a much harder time finding payloads, even if they're giving massively discounted prices.
yeah, makes sense. By the way, okay, we'll go through the summary, and then I have some other questions just
Sure.
I wanted to ask you, curious about. So this can already be shown through Rocket Lab's launch manifest. Greater than 90% of their planned launches for 24 and 25 fall into that 30% segment, which I think sounds pretty promising, really. Like
Right.
this segment seems to be growing pretty well.
Right.
Did
It's
you agree
somewhat
with that?
disappointing that Rocket Lab hasn't done more military launches or the NASA rideshare missions. Like every single one of Launcher One's flights were rideshare missions for the US military or for NASA. Strange that Rocket Lab hasn't gotten more of these launches.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
it's
mean,
a situation where Launcher One is being more like subsidized by the US government with good lobbyists or something.
yeah,
Sure.
it might have been something like that. I
Right.
do think they wanted to kind of spread out contracts to every company they could. Like, they
Right.
gave the Tropics to Astra and all that kind of stuff. But, Rocket Lab's kind of the last one standing right now for
Right.
small
It's
launch.
strange no one has competed successfully. There's been like 3 of these programs that have launched and failed. It's
Yeah, well,
a
I
very
guess
tough problem.
they do say small launch is pretty hard to solve and do it
Right.
economically. So yeah, the military launches that make up another 30% will continue to be individual.
Right.
Are you surprised we don't have more of those on the manifest for the next year?
I think 90% of Rocket Lab's missions and 20 launches in total is a fair number.
Of the military ones?
Oh, for military. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the unique orbital plane. For military, I'm not sure. It seems like they're subsidizing like smaller launch vehicles. Like there's Firefly Alpha is really going after this market as well. They have lots of military flights.
Yeah. Okay.
Electron has Haste, which I suppose is going after the same market or a similar military market.
Suborbital.
Right.
Yeah. So around 30% of the market for dedicated small satellite launches will disappear with better alternatives arising. But still, we're looking at growth of 200% in a single year. And,
Right.
it seems like the future is still pretty strong for small launch. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially for the unique orbital plane market and the military satellites. This
That's
is
good to
very
hear
good.
because, when I start like with the first line or whatever and I see 30% is going to disappear, it's like,
Right.
oh, but
Yeah. Then
so
you
you're
realize
pretty,
Rocket Lab doesn't really go after it. Right.
sorry, what's that?
Then you realize Rocket Lab really doesn't go after that market. They're going after, unique orbital plane and military.
Yeah, for sure. So, I've been feeling pretty comfortable overall with Electron and where they sit. We did just have that Adam Spice interview. He mentioned they're not going to try to reuse an Electron
Right.
booster this year. How did you feel about that? Were you surprised at all?
When did they first announce that they were going to try and reuse them? In 2019, I think it was, and they first
Is it that?
recovered a booster in I think 2022, something like that.
I thought it was more like 2021, but I'd have to go back and see. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
See, it seems like they could have gone faster here. SpaceX landed their first booster in 2015 and reflew it in 2017. Feels like they should be going a lot faster there.
Yeah, well, I guess the first SpaceX booster that landed didn't have to go for a swim though, but
Right.
could be. So yeah, a little bit of disappointing news there, at least for me on Electron on that
I think
one.
what's slightly more disappointing than that is they're only planning at max to be reusing around 50% of the boosters, which is very strange. The average mass of an Electron launch, the average mass of the satellites launched is 116 kilograms.
Yeah,
So it seems like you have a lot of margin here to reuse the booster. Apparently not.
I guess it depends on. I mean, again, like my knowledge of orbits and stuff like that, I wish it was stronger, but sounds like it depends on the mission requirements. I know when they were planning to use the helicopter, they said they didn't think they could do the catches at night, and that
Right.
was a big constraint. But that shouldn't matter now. So
Yeah, that should be fine. And at
you would
night,
think.
I'm not sure how many launches really need to be done at night. All of the orbits they go to seems like they can be done during the day too. It's not like Dragon missions that have to dock with the ISS and have to be done at night.
Yeah. Well, there's one Astro scale coming up. I think it's like an instantaneous launch window. So I guess they just have to go when they have to go on that one to inspect
I
another
suppose. Yeah.
satellite.
Yeah.
But do you think there could be much of a market in small sats in the future for like servicing other satellites, or is that more of a larger rocket
I think
category?
if you're trying to like add capability or lifetime to a geostationary, like big, like single use, like $200 million satellites, there's a big market here. Having like something to do like control the attitude of it. Like if you could do this to Hubble and Hubble could point itself, this would be very useful.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think there's a pretty big market there in the future.
Hmm. And then I guess the other thing I was curious on your thoughts about like ABL and Firefly.
Right.
So, kind of bigger rockets. And then even Terran 1 getting canceled. Did that take you off guard?
What took me off guard more than that is them Terran not focusing more on, or Relativity not focusing more on reusability. The canceling RS1, this seems to make seems to make sense. They canceled Falcon 1, SpaceX did early on to focus more
Yeah.
on medium launch. This makes sense.
So is Rocket Lab making the mistake then? Because they seem to be the only one not canceling their first small rocket.
Rocket Lab is like SpaceX 15 years ago, but they focus more on making money. They're not going to cancel like the Falcon 1 like SpaceX did, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Rocket Lab's still not making money yet, though. But
Soon enough.
I hope
Electron
so.
has a positive gross margin.
Yeah. Well, the cadence continues to grow. Hopefully,
Right.
Are you worried at all about the slow start to the year for launches?
I suppose there is more weather constraints in the beginning part of the year. Maybe not in the southern hemisphere, but maybe I don't think they'll get to 22 launches like they're planning, but I
No.
think they will increase cadence significantly from the previous year.
Do you have a guess on number of launches? Are we talking
Let's see.
20, 18?
I'll call it at 18.
18.
I'll put it there.
Ooh. I wonder
Someone
if
want to
that'd be
put the
good.
over under on that?
How bad that'd be for the stock price if that happened.
Would be a slight miss, I suppose. Wouldn't be too terrible.
Yeah.
Especially from a long-term perspective. Just the growth rate matters more than if they really hit 22 or not.
Yeah. I mean, in a year-over-year growth, that would even 18 would still be quite
almost
strong.
200%.
Yeah. So Firefly and ABL. Firefly, I believe, is like a 1 ton. The RS1
That's right.
that's around a 1 ton as well.
1.3 tons.
1.3. Okay. You think there's much overlap there with Electron?
I'm working on another blog post where I go into this.
Oh yeah.
So, right. Firefly's currently 5 planned launches. 2 of them are rideshare, like we were talking about. Launcher 1 and Astroflights. There's a NASA rideshare mission and a commercial rideshare mission.
Okay.
These are somewhat addressable by Rocket Lab. They might have higher mass satellites, so it isn't quite as good. Another launch they have planned is responsive space mission, military mission.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't seem like this is addressable by Electron because you have to maybe have a rocket like always ready to fly, and this would impact their commercial customers. So
you don't have any info on like the size of that mission, eh? Do you?
No, it's classified.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Right. Yeah. They have a synthetic aperture radar satellite launching that is around 200 kilograms. So maybe this is really pushing the mass capability of Electron. Maybe it's over the mass capability of Electron and they just can't launch it. And the final of the 5 planned launches is a Constellation mission, which apparently is using heavy satellites and can't launch on Electron either. So they have 5 planned launches versus Rocket Lab's planned 20. So they're going after like an even niche than Rocket Lab goes after.
Yeah. Do you think there's enough of a market there for them as well in launch?
I think if they want to get to, I think, 5 launches this year, or some of those might be spread over 2025. I think there's a market here. They're currently charging $15 million per launch too. So I think there's room here to survive as a company.
Okay. I just feel like 5 launches, it's cadence that low. I feel like it's tough to make money. Like Electron didn't really.
They are going for a medium lift vehicle, so there's a lot more to be made there.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they'll even end up canceling Alpha as well then.
Maybe. That's not too unlikely.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, they do have the military contract, so there might be more investment there that keeps them from canceling it.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious what sort of cadence you think Electron could be doing in the future, say like 5 years out. So when I was doing my own model, I just kind of left it flat around mid-20s because I wasn't really sure where that's going to go. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've tried modeling this out. One of the tough problems here is you have to model out the customers that are using the capabilities the satellites provide, and this is a lot harder than just looking at what the satellites do. So I think there's at least room for between like 2x and 5x growth from where we are today. So I'll just
really, you think? Oh, sorry. When you say from where we are we talking
from 10 launches a year?
Okay,
for Electron.
Okay, well, that's a pretty wide range, but
right. Yeah. Maybe in a year I'll do some more research and come back on.
Okay, well, that would be extremely bullish if they were launching, say, 50 times a year.
Yeah, at that point, you might get to constellations big enough that they launch on transporter missions, so not addressable by Electron anymore.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
We can talk about how Nova can compete with Electron too.
Sure. I
Very
mean,
interesting.
what thoughts do you have about Nova?
I was thinking about that today. I think Nova is a vehicle that's actually in a very useful payload class because it can compete both with Electron and with Neutron.
Hmm.
You can see most of the payloads that have gone to low Earth orbit, like the average payload of a customer Falcon 9 missions is 6 tons.
Really?
So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really
That
with Starlink where they really push the
seems
rocket.
like quite a underutilization, though.
That's right. Falcon 9 was originally built for the CRS contracts early on, so they had to just launch a Dragon.
Right.
So that's what really set the requirements.
Hmm.
So with Nova, they can launch most of the commercial and government missions going to low Earth orbit, and they can still, if they're fully reusable, they can get all the small satellites as well and do transporter missions.
Yeah. I mean, that could be.
I think this is the biggest source of competition in the future.
So you would be personally more worried about Nova than Rideshare or any other smaller
Yeah.
launch vehicle.
Nova really competes for the niche that Electron's going for, constellations that require unique orbital planes.
Yeah. And then, have any thoughts on like how much they would be able to launch for profitably if they're able to achieve full reuse?
That's infinite.
Yeah.
Full. If like the ideal of full reusability when you're launching.
Wow. There's always
Maybe
some work to be done.
yeah. Maybe if you're like amortizing costs, it might be like around $1 to $2 million. Still that's a lot. And for Nova, you can launch constellations on Nova because it's a fully rapidly reusable vehicle. So you can just launch way more. You can get a lot higher launch cadence.
I mean, they have a long way to go, but
They do.
they
A vehicle like Nova, let's say.
sure. It's a very interesting design when I looked at it.
It is really cool.
Yeah, I only really dove into it maybe a few months ago, but I guess they've been around for a while.
Hmm.
By the way, I didn't really ask you before in the intro, so maybe I'll just put this in now. Just kind of curious about your background, how you got into all this,
Sure.
and how that kind of developed.
Yeah. So this was 7 years ago when I was 10 years old. I stumbled upon a everyday astronaut video. Thought, this space thing's pretty cool. I'll watch videos on it. Right. Just like really dive down into that rabbit hole, and now I just have all the knowledge required to make these models, write these blog posts, and I can really nerd out about that.
And you still have the interest to keep doing it?
Oh, of course, it's cool. Space is cool now.
Okay, so
It's not like Boeing days. Like,
yeah,
rockets are landing.
yeah. Pretty bullish about the future of Starship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking a lot about what will drive Starship launch cadence. You really have the stepping aside from Mars, because that's just SpaceX will pay whatever it takes to get to Mars. You might have around 10 launches per year doing moon missions, and then you have the large space stations that are launching. So customer launches, I think, this decade that will peak at around maybe 20 per year. Right? And then Starlink, that's another, maybe there's room for 20 to 30 Starlink launches per year on Starship while they build out the constellation and just keeping the constellation replenished. So I think for customer launches, you could get around 50 per year with Starship by the end of the decade.
That'd be pretty impressive. I mean, it's already, Falcon's still well beyond that, but
Right.
some of
Starship
the
is a much bigger
numbers.
rocket. I think orbital launches will actually decline after 2025 when Starlink switches to Starship from Falcon
Well, it
9.
makes sense if you can get that kind of mass in a single
Right.
launch, I suppose. But it's going to change a lot.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
When we enter the paradigm of fully and rapidly reusable launch vehicles, this really changes how you make satellites as well. You can see in like K2 space where they're just making like very massive and very high volume satellites, which you can make for a lot cheaper because you don't have the same constraints. Seems like in a world where like Nova or a small sat or a medium lift fully and rapidly reusable launch vehicles launching, there's a lot of the constraints on satellite development are also lifted. So this also
Yeah.
doesn't bode well for Electron in 15 years, maybe.
15 years. So is it fair to say you think the market's looking pretty good in kind of the medium term for Electron? And then
Yeah.
as we
For the
get
next
further
5 years,
out,
it absolutely looks great.
yeah,
Next 10 years gets slightly worse. Next 20,
no. Well, hopefully by then, Rocket Lab should not be very reliant on Electron as a vehicle.
absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts about Neutron operating in that kind of a environment when we have a Stoke Nova coming online? And of course, Starship.
Already competing with Falcon 9 because Neutron has lower payload capacity. They'll have to charge around $40 million to be competitive with current Falcon 9 missions. So already they'll have to be reusing rockets and getting cadence up if they're launching like Kuiper like 50 times a year or something, which I think is possible. And then after that, really, they need to develop a fully and rapidly usable launch vehicle in the 2030s.
So you think we might be seeing another launcher from Rocket Lab?
Absolutely. Rocket Lab wants it. Peter Beck wants Rocket Lab to be a 100-year launch company. You need to be fully reusable.
Well, he also said he wasn't going to build another rocket, but
yeah, he'll eat another hat, and we'll get a cool rocket out of it. So I think
maybe. I hope so. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I was reading the When the Heavens Went on Sale, the Rocket Lab section in it, and Peter Beck mentioned that you could use a small launch vehicle to replenish constellation satellites once they go down, because the argument is if you're putting internet in space, this is an essential service in space, so you can't have this go down ever.
Right.
So you can launch constellation satellites on an Electron to replenish it, which now this doesn't make much sense because above our heads right now are 20 Starlink satellites.
Yeah.
You don't need to replenish one of these if they go down.
Right. You enjoying the book?
Oh, amazing book. It's great. The power went out in my house a week ago. I just read that book for 6 hours straight. That was fun.
Nice. Yeah. Anything in particular that stood out to you with any of the companies, basically Firefly, Astra, Rocket Lab, anything else?
The lower launch cadence of Firefly kind of stood out. I thought they'd be a lot higher by now, but apparently not. Launcher One, really, I wanted Launcher One to be successful. I was reading some of Eric Berger's old articles on it, how they really were doing test-driven development and really want to get costs down. Then they brought in a CEO who used to work for Boeing, and they got the $700 million raised and then went bankrupt. So,
yeah, it
seems like the Boeing guy steps in, suddenly things don't work out so well.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to blame him for everything, but it did seem like. And then you hear rumors about when Rocket Lab, purchased their facility and equipment, that they seem to have like a ton of excess going on, and
not much use on the equipment. Right?
Yeah, so maybe some unforced failures there, but yeah, the whole concept was definitely different, at least.
It was really cool.
So are we going to get any more Rocket Lab videos from you in the future? More evaluations or?
Yeah. I really need to rework the valuation model from the ground up to really include all the research I did from this, and then model out all the satellites that are going to be launched to get a good space systems model. There's a lot more videos to make.
Yeah, I have to do that as well. I have to make a lot of updates, but I've just been waiting for the next earnings call in a couple weeks. So
we could go into the Neutron post now if you want to get into that.
Into the what?
The Neutron blog post.
Oh, if you'd like.
I think this chart is one of the most useful that I've made, just showing payloads by the mass class. I think, in arguments about if Neutron is actually a good rocket, this is very useful to cite. You can see which of these payloads that Neutron can't launch. It's really, these commercial geostationary satellites, because they're not very optimized for a high energy orbit like Vulcan is, right? And rightfully so, because this is a minority of the market now. I think you can see this pie chart. I'll zoom in. Right. Starlink is, of course, the vast majority in commercial geostationary launches, under 20%. You shouldn't be optimizing for this. You should optimize for the big constellation market.
Right.
So really, this is fact-checking Rocket Lab's claim that Neutron can launch 98% of the payloads planned to be launched in the next 10 years or whatever time frame they used. That's true. Because launches you can really launch at any mass class if you're cheap enough.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So the next Neutron post, are you just kind of diving into their competitiveness on that, or?
Yeah, this is diving into the competitiveness. You can see a lot of constellation launchers being compared directly between their prices. And you can see that Neutron really has to get their costs a lot lower than the other comparable rockets, lower than $40 million to really be competitive.
Okay, because the number they've been saying has been more like 50. So
Right. For just general customer launches, I think that's true because on constellations, you're trying to get the cost per satellite low enough. But if your average satellite is around like 6 tons, like I said earlier, then you can still stay around those Falcon 9 prices.
right.
You're providing essentially the same service.
Yeah, it makes no difference there. So
Yeah. For constellations, it's very different though.
Changes the whole math.
Right. This is where something like Stokes Nova, if you're just launching very often and you're fully reusable, it starts to look very bad for other partially reusable rockets.
How's I see you got the fairing diameters in there. How does
Right.
Neutrons compare versus some of these other ones?
I think Neutron's external fairing diameter is around 5 meters. This number might be slightly off, but the fairing volume is a lot less than other comparable rockets because they have the clamshell fairings.
So it is less, and then
yeah. On some satellites, like the Iridium satellites, it seems like they would be volume limited, not mass limited. So a larger fairing would be more ideal. But
that's not ideal. But it's the first version.
And you're taking them back, it's fine.
What's that?
If the fairings are just built into the rocket and you're saving a little bit of money there, then this is a good situation to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking there will probably be several block upgrades down the line, so maybe that is something. One of the things they can address.
If they stretch the tanks a little bit, got to maybe around like 15 to 20 tons, then I think it would be a lot better as a constellation launch vehicle, and they could raise prices to around Falcon 9 maybe.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. Like, let's say Starship, I know this is a bit of a different question, but when we were talking about Starship, launching potentially like 50 times or whatever, when do you see Falcon 9 no longer being necessary? Because Elon's kind of said like he wants to switch almost
Elon
everything.
Also said that they'll stop launching Falcon 9 when there isn't customers that want to fly on it.
Oh, is that what he said?
Yeah, he said that somewhere. Yeah. Maybe on Lex. I'm not sure. So it's really about how long it'll take for just satellite providers, satellite builders to really become accustomed to fully and rapidly reusable rockets. So whenever Starship becomes fully reusable, maybe 3 years, maybe, then there will be another delay of maybe 5 to 10 years until we really enter a new paradigm of satellite development. There's a lot of time left for partially reusable launch vehicles, a lot more than I think a lot of people expect.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, even like New Glenn, we haven't really heard much about second stage reusability on that one as well, and relativity. So
apparently, the mass fractions, if relatively reusable, are very low. Like currently, they can get around 25 tons to orbit reusable. So, and if you reuse the second stage on top of that, you're at 15 tons compared to your biggest competitor, Starship, which is 150 tons. It doesn't look very good.
Yeah. So how much time is left for reusable vehicles then?
Partially reusable vehicles.
Partially, sorry.
Right. I think just once, what you're really tracking there is how long it'll take satellite manufacturers to become accustomed to fully and rapidly usable launch vehicles. And I think that'll take a while, over a decade, to really get to like K2 style satellites. K2 is a company that makes the very large satellites that are less efficient but cheaper. I think more than 10 years at least. I think in 2025 or 2026, we'll see peak Falcon 9 launch cadence, though, as Starlink shifts over to Starship.
It'll start to peter off.
Yeah.
I guess Starlink is the vast majority of their launches, really.
Right. And Starlink, I think if, like, for example, Neutron gets Kuiper launches, I think it'll be very useful to really increase cadence and launch a riskier payload that it's okay to destroy on a slightly riskier launch on the 17th launch of a booster. I think Neutron really needs to get a Kuiper contract to really be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping they do down the line. Right. We'll see. That's like, I think Kuiper and, getting a decent piece of the NSSL lane 1 at least would be, a great way to kind of anchor their customer base.
And on NSSL, I think Stokes Nova might actually be able to hit most of the target orbits if they just stretch it to around 8 tons.
You're talking lane 2 now?
Lane 2, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, because they can refuel in orbit, so they can get, if it's an 8-ton launch vehicle, if they stretch it, they could get 8 tons to geostationary orbit. There was only one target orbit that I think they couldn't hit, which is the polar to target orbit, which is 17 tons, to a polar orbit, which the Nova won't be able to hit.
I didn't know. So Nova, they're talking about orbital refueling as well.
Right. Yeah. They're talking about
Okay.
landing on the moon.
That I was not familiar with.
Yeah.
Wow, they are quite ambitious.
Yeah. It seems like, currently they've raised around $250 million. At a current rate, they might get to a first launch before the cost that it took Virgin Orbit to get to a first launch, with a vehicle that's planned to be fully and rapidly reusable.
I mean, yeah, if that happens, that'd be wild.
Yeah.
That is super cheap to develop a rocket. Like
Right.
that's, yeah, wow. Interesting company. I'd, love to see them go public one day.
Successful. Yeah.
All right. Anything else you'd like to share on the Neutron front here?
I don't think there's too much more in this blog post that I can go into. I think that's most of it. Yeah, I think that's all I have prepared to cover after
Right.
I think around 4 months of research.
Yeah. So just to wrap up here, just curious, your final thoughts and impressions on the future of Electron and the future of the small launch space, if you had to kind of summarize it a little bit.
It's safe for 10 years. After that, maybe not. Right.
Okay, you can't get much more simple than that.
Yeah. The small
enough.
satellite constellations are really what will drive it and keep it secure. And that might be around for even more than 10 years, maybe 10 to 20 years.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. I think by then, hopefully, Rocket Lab will be operating their own constellation, or
Right.
operating Neutron, doing their own thing. So, yeah, that sounds like it would work out well to me.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Chris, and sharing your research with us. Again, if anyone's interested, they can check out your Twitter and YouTube.
Check out the
any
blog
other, and the blog. I can share the link to that as well. Right. Any other final thoughts or messages you'd like to share?
No, just thanks for having me on. This is awesome. I just started doing this research around 4 months ago. I already have gotten enough to get on Dave G. This is really awesome.
Wow, I mean, that's pretty low bar, but I thought it was an interesting blog post. So not too many people are really looking into small launch. Everyone's so interested in the larger vehicles. So
it's kind of strange that I just had a few questions about just the launch market that I couldn't find any answers to. So I just got all of the data myself. It's strange no one else has really can't see my screen anymore, but the chart.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to share it again? Or
no, it's fine. Just the chart of mass by payload type. I just couldn't find anything like this. It seems like other people should be doing things like this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Is the Neutron blog post live yet, or no?
That's right.
It is. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely take a closer look at that one later. Okay, so thank you for sharing your research, and to everyone watching, I will see you in the next video. I hope you have a great day. Bye for now.